welcome back to my channel, and I am so excited to be bringing you the first episode in my very own Red Dirt and Stardust TBR game. This is Pages Between the Red Dirt and Stardust. I am going to pull it up here on the screen for you. So as you can see, it is a game board style TBR. I was definitely heavily influenced by a few other YouTubers who have their own TBR games, specifically TBR Star Hop, TBR Bakery, TBR University, and the Lord of the Rings 2 Libraries 1. I would have just shown little flashes of each of those, and down in the description I'm going to have a link to all their creators and a link to the playlist of said games. But as I said, I was very heavily inspired by these games, as well as many other TBR games that are self-made here on YouTube and Instagram. After last year doing readathons throughout the year for my TBR, I thought I really want to have something that is wholly mine, that is my TBR game specific for my channel, and then to do these readathons, if I so choose, on the side. So I essentially picked all the little things that I liked from different games, and then I mushed it together and created this. As you can see, it is a trail board game. So you work your way from the book pile down the bottom all the way to the witch reading in the moon. And each footprint is a space, and as you can see on each of those footprints, there are stars or moons. Those stars and moons are related to prompts. The prompt cards will sit where you can see the little spaces. You're probably also wondering what that third prompt card section is for, but I'll get to that in a minute. As you can see, I have two spots on here that specifically relate to e-readers. That is because you may know I recently got a Kobo, and I really want to make sure that I am giving that the time of day. And maybe that means having a specific space that makes me have to read on the Kobo. Though that does not mean I can't read other books via e-book, but these are ones that mean you have no choice but to do a Kobo or an e-book read that fits the prompt that you pull. You will then also see these little jars. So I've got my Red Dirt jars and my Stardust jars. All four of them represent my TBR jar. This is the first place where the game kind of changes up depending on how I went with my last TBR. So if I have successfully completed my last month's TBR, those jars will fall over, which will mean that I will essentially dance my way along those spills, and I will skip 5 spots on each side. It is a shorter game if I've been successful with my previous month's TBR, and it is a longer game if I have not been. This is something that I picked up from TBR University. As you can see, there are also these footprints that have random dots on them. Those are going to be my monthly special prompt spots. So each month, depending on what is happening in said month, I will then add a picture of some type to those spots, and over in the section with the unmarked card holder section is where my monthly special prompts will be. For example, at Christmas time, I'll have Christmas related things, and my prompts will be Christmas and holiday related prompts. Same goes for October with Halloween, Easter time, maybe birthday month time. There are many things that will then create those spots, and this gives me the flexibility to change them up, but to kind of make it so I may have to read something that fits with what's happening within the month. For example, this month it is going to be Australian themed items because during the month of January we have Australia Day here in Australia. Just a quick little sidebar in relation to that, and I don't want to turn a TBR video into politics, but considering I'm doing a Australia Day themed special prompts throughout this month, so Australian themed prompts, I thought it would be appropriate to take this moment to just discuss Australia Day and how that fits within our culture currently here in Australia, especially because it is a very controversial topic at this time. So the date, the 26th of January for Australia Day, was originally chosen to commemorate the establishment of the colony in New South Wales. As it marked the day the British flag was raised in Sydney Cove after the landing of the First Fleet in 1788. Which is one of the reasons why a lot of Indigenous people here in Australia are referring to Australia Day as Invasion Day. And to note, this is not the first time this issue has been raised. It actually took 50 years from that initial flag raising for the day to be an official public holiday in New South Wales. It was known as Anniversary Day and commenced in 1838. By the first centenary, which was in 1888, all states except for South Australia had joined in with New South Wales to celebrate the holiday. In 1910, South Australia chose to adopt the 26th of January as Foundation Day, which actually replaced Accession Day, which was held on the 22nd of January and marked the accession of King Edward VII to the throne. It actually wasn't until 1915 that an Australia Day was adopted nationally. And that actually occurred in 1915 on the 30th of July. It actually kind of lined up with the First World War and were used heavily for earnest patriotism and fundraisers. And in fact, it was repeated in subsequent years of the war, still in July. It actually wasn't until 1935 that all states in Australia started celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January. Though at that point, New South Wales was still calling it Anniversary Day. And actually, 3 years later, in 1938, which was the 150th anniversary of the landing in Sydney Cove, an Aboriginal Day of Mourning was held in Sydney. And though Australia Day was celebrated to a certain extent, it wasn't until 1994 that Australia Day became a national public holiday for all states and territories. So right now, there is a lot of controversy around Australia Day, especially because of its early origins. I know a lot of people who say, but it's always been celebrated this day, or this is when it's celebrated, this is how it's always been. And I've got two comments to that. One, I've just given you the history, and that isn't how it's always been. And two, just because something has always been done some way does not mean it is the correct way. I think it is important for us as a country to have a day to celebrate ourselves as a country and to remember our history. But I also do not think that it needs to be on a day that causes a large portion of our population, a large portion of our citizens to feel the unrest that they feel. We are pushing the celebration of a day which is meant to commemorate our mateship, our multiculturalism, our current patriotism on a day that makes a large portion of people not feel any of those things. And I know it is not the intention of the country as a whole, of our government, to make people feel that way, to create those feelings. But it is one of those situations where somebody says they are offended by something you've said or done. And though that was not your intention, your intentions do not mitigate their feeling of offense or hurt. Regardless of what you intended by your behaviors or your words, they did not feel that. Therefore, you should be changing your actions or your words, not just going, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I intended, and wiping your hands of it. No, it is the responsibility of the person who caused the offense, who caused the hurt, to change their behaviors, to change their words, regardless of what your intent was, because it still made somebody feel not great. And I think the same goes for this situation. The intent of an Australia Day is to celebrate our culture, celebrate our people, all of our people, and reflect on where we want to be going as a country. Yes, it's important to remember and to learn from our past and acknowledge that very uncomfortable history, but it is also important to look towards the future and where we want our country to sit and what we want our country to represent. Therefore, I sit in the camp that thinks that we should change the date. It wasn't until 1994 that the day was even officially, as a nation, classed as Australia Day, was a public holiday. I was born before that. So I was alive before the decision was made to officially make that the day. And now we've learnt from that. In the 20 years or so since then, we have learnt more. Therefore, as a country, as a nation, as a people, we should make the choice to move the day to a date that better actually identifies the things that we are trying to take that time to celebrate. Personally, I am a fan of May 8th because Mate Day is the perfect day to celebrate being Australian. So with all that said, you're probably wondering why I've still chosen to make my special prompts, make that part of my TBR this month around Australia Day or about Australia, because it is Australia Day this month. That's because I think that this was the perfect opportunity for me to put this out here, but also for me to sit in that discomfort, for me to consider how I choose to celebrate being Australian and what being Australian means for me. And potentially, hopefully, fingers crossed, the game will actually give me the opportunity to pick up books by different authors that sit in different cultures than my own, but also call Australia home. So that is why I've chosen to still make Australia the basis, the theme of my special prompts for this month. I got all that information from both the State Library of South Australian website, which I will link down below in the description box, but I'm also going to put down there a link to the Australia Day Council website as well, just in case you are interested in reading more about it. But I'm definitely hoping in coming years, I'll be doing my Australian prompts in a different month for a different day. But that is the outline of my game, my pages between the Red Dirt and Stardust TBR board game. Because this is going to be our first month doing it, I have decided to go the long way. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that is not a bad decision that I have made. And before we jump into it, I will just note that when we also get to the end space, we're going to celebrate by picking one book with no prompts that I would like to read throughout the month. But I'm already getting the impression this is going to be a long video. So pause it here, grab a drink, grab a snack, and then we will jump in to my first roll. Okay, so roll number one, we've got our little dinosaur here starting on the little pile of books, and we've got a 12D dice here. And our first roll is a 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have landed on a moon prompt, but it has the little e-reader here. So it is going to be a moon prompt that has to be read on our e-reader. and it's the journey is the first prompt. So let's have a look what we selected for that one. So for my first roll, we landed on the first e-reader prompt, and that's a moon card. And we got the prompt, it's the journey. For the quote, it's not the destination, it's the journey. This represents one of those traveling books, the journey books, which in general are actually not my general cup of tea. But I want to read more of them. I want to see if it is something I like or not. Because sometimes I really think that they are my jam when people are traveling and they're stuck together and bonds and relationships form. I think that's my jam, but then I will read a different type of journey book and I'll think, yeah, nah. So I am on a journey to discover if journey books are my thing. And for this month, we're going to be reading from my Kobo, and specifically, we're going to be reading The Last Pendragon by Sarah Woodbury. And this is the first book in the Last Pendragon saga. It's an Arthurian fantasy and follows a princess called Rian, who learnt early on that demons are not to be trusted. But when a young man named Cade is pulled before her father's throne, and she learns that he's not only Arthur's heir, but touched by the Cid. I think that's how you say it. I will put the word here from what was written on the blurb, but I assume they are essentially the demons within this story. But Rian has to decide between the life she's left behind or the one that lays before her. This does have a historical, medieval romance kind of feel to the blurb so far, and I think that's going to be a heavy plot point throughout. But my understanding, it is also a journey book with a lot of Arthurian myth and legend within it. I am definitely looking forward to reading it. It says here that it is the first novella within the story, so hopefully it's going to be a quick-ish read for me, and I'll see if this is something I'm interested in continuing with, or if this is a series that I'll be able to knock off my list. But then on to roll 2. All right, roll 2. Hopefully we get a good one. As you can see, we are going to be going the full length of this track. It is a 1. And we've landed on the eagle. So that is a monthly special prompt, which means it is Australia for the month of January. And our first prompt is author. So it's an Australian author. And then I land on my first monthly special prompt. And that one was for an Australian author. There was definitely a lot to choose from in here. And I'll be honest, at first I was considering reading a Melina Macheta book, specifically The Piper's Son. So Melina Macheta has got a multicultural background, and a lot of her stories really include that as a very heavy plot point within them. So I was leaning towards that one. But as you might remember, last year I was going to do a reread of Tomorrow When the War Began by John Marsden, and I was not able to achieve that. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to do so. This is a coming-of-age story. It focuses on Ellie and her group of friends who go camping in, I guess, a gully, a very heavily forested gully close to their town over the weekend. And when they return, they find out that war has broken out within their town, that they have been invaded and their town has been taken over. And this story is the start of a very popular series. In fact, there is a movie based on the first book. And I'll be honest, I've never watched it because I don't want to ruin the book. So let me know down in the description if it's actually a movie worth watching. But this is Ellie and her friends' not only coming of age story, but doing so when they are fighting for their family, fighting for their friends, fighting for survival, and fighting for their country. So I kind of thought that this actually potentially fits within, I guess, what I'm hoping to do as part of this prompt. It says here, they've got no weapons except courage. They've got no help except themselves. They've got nothing except friendship. How strong can you be when the world is full of people trying to kill you? I really enjoyed this when I read it back in high school, and I'm hoping I'm going to enjoy it just as much now. Roll number 3. Okay, we're definitely moving it slowly, and that one is also a 2, so that is very slow. 1, 2. And we have landed on the little jar, which means we are going to be pulling from the TBR jar. And we landed on a TBR jar. So this is my TBR jar. I am going to get a little pretty sticker that actually says what it is. But I have got a heap of books in here. And there is a heap in here. And these books are actually all books that were on my TBR in some way, shape or form for 2024. And I was not able to finish them, to complete them. So these are all TBR veterans. And we are going to pick our first book from here. Okay. What have we got? City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This little star here means it is a book that I physically own. So we are going to be reading City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. I'm not going to go get the book. I'm just going to put a pretty picture here. This is the first book in the Immortal Instruments series. It is a young adult series about shadow hunters, essentially demon hunters, who use runes that they tattoo into their skin that provide them additional strength, power, etc. to fight off the demons. It is one of those books I started and I've never finished. I was really into the Shadowhunters television series, which is why I started reading the book series. They are very different. They're alternatives to each other, alternative timelines, alternative story paths. And this year has to be the year that I finish this book because it has been on my currently reading on Goodreads since like 2018. So I need to read it and decide if I'm going to continue with this series or I'm going to DNF it and declutter the other books I have in this series. Hopefully January is going to be the month I do that. Roll 4, and we still haven't even taken the first turn. Come on, give me something higher than a 2. Oh, it's a 9. That is definitely a better roll. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that one is a moon prompt. Spiceless. Interesting. Roll number 4, we got another moon and it was Spiceless. So Spiceless is essentially a book that is not spicy. This is the opposite to a spice book. It is a spiceless book. So it can be a romance. It doesn't have to be a romance, but it just has to not have spice being a heavy component of the story. So I've decided to continue reading The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. You might remember I started this at the end of last year as part of a book club I'm doing at work, and I am still yet to finish it. So far, I am enjoying the different writing style, the very personal diary-like writing style that seems to be the way this is written. I'm enjoying that. I have friends who did not enjoy that so much, but I'm interested to see where this story goes, and hopefully we'll see if I can figure out who the killer is. Time for roll 5. 2. 1, 2. And we have another TBR jar. So we're going to be getting a few books from the TBR this month. I thought having only 4 TBR jar spaces on the board would mean I don't get it very often, but I landed on it again. So we are back into my TBR jar. Reminder, these are all books that were on my TBR for 2024. Some of them I started, some of them I didn't, but none of them were completed. So let's dive back in here. Okay. What is this one here? Okay, looks like it is one I own. It is, I cannot read any of my handwriting. Oh, Red Riding Hood by Sarah Blakely Cartwright. So this is a Red Riding Hood retelling. From the blurb, I got the impression it is a werewolf style story. So essentially there is a young woman in the village. Every year a person is sacrificed to the wolf in the woods so that their village will be saved. Something happens, I'm not exactly sure what, but people start to get picked off. Our Red Riding Hood inspired character is the only person who can actually hear the wolf talking or thinking, has a connection to the wolf. And I think it's definitely going to have some twists and turns. I'm pretty sure a movie was also made about this one. If there was, I'll put a little picture of the cover over here. But I am looking forward to reading it. Roll 6. We're getting there. And that's a 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we have a star prompt. Is that our first star prompt of the game? I think it is. And it is sci-fi. And then we got sci-fi. For this, I have decided to go with an audiobook. It is a series I have been reading for a while. It is going to be the next book in the Dragon Lords of Valdir series. We're up to book 8 by S.E. Smith. I listened to it via audiobook, so I've never seen the word written down. I would read this and say something like Jawin's love, but I have a feeling it's one of the characters we've already met, and I am completely butchering that name. Once I have listened to the audiobook, I will be able to tell you what it actually is meant to be. But this is going to be my sci-fi read. Roll 7. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If we get an 8, we can finish this game up. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is The Crow. So that's another monthly special prompt. This one right here. And the prompt is Indigenous. So it is a Australian Indigenous book. Roll 7 is another Australian prompt. And for that, we actually got Indigenous. And I've decided to read Drop Bear, which is Evelyn O'Raylan's debut novel. It's a mixture of poetry and essays. And it says here that it offers an eloquent witness to the entangled present, an uncompromising provocation of history, and an embattled but redemptive hope for a decolonial future. It confronts the tropes and iconography of an unreconciled nation with biting satire and lyrical fury. I am really looking forward to reading this. I'm imagining that at points within this, it is definitely going to be uncomfortable for me as a white Australian, but that is even more of a reason why I should read this. So I'm really looking forward to it. Roll 8, and hopefully this is the last roll for this month's game. 3. 1, 2, 3. And we are out of the game. So that means I get to select any book of my choice. And that was our last roll. So for any book of my choice for my free spin, my end spot read, I've actually decided to go with a graphic novel. So this is Mandela and the General. It's by John Carlin and Oriel Mallet. This is a retelling about what happened in South Africa in the 1990s when Nelson Mandela led the movement against structural racism in South Africa, and how two men on opposing sides of the movement had to work together to circumvent an all-out race war and bloodbath. I really enjoy history told in this graphic novel format. This is not the first graphic novel similar to this that I have read, and I'm looking forward to diving into this one and studying the different aspects of the story. That is one of the big things about graphic novels. Yes, they are rather quick to work through. They are easy to read in a certain extent, but you really need to look at all the nuances through the drawings to get a complete picture of what you're being told. And I am looking forward to putting some time aside to do that. And to be honest, this pick, on another note, was a little bit cheaty to some extent. And that is because this month is also TBRathon, which is a readathon hosted by Leandra at the TBR Zero. This readathon is about moving books off of your TBR, and Mandela and the General is a book off of my physical TBR, and in fact is going to fit within my starting prompt for the Lost in the Library Gameboard, which I am going to be utilizing throughout this month. I am going to be providing a TBRathon specific vlog at the end of the month, and you can meander your way through the library with me throughout that vlog. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste tester here for my first roll. But as you can see, as part of this readathon, you have to select a starting point, a starting room within the library, and I selected the manga / graphic novel room, hence Mandela and the General. But like I said, let's jump in and I'll show you my first roll before I will discuss the first book I'll be rolling in for it. We are going to be starting over here in the manga graphic novel room, but as a taste tester, just to get you all interested for my upcoming reading vlog, I am going to do my first roll here, but you will see it repeated in my vlog. Once again, I've got the 12-sided dice here and the first roll. I'm not sure which way I'm interested in going yet, but that is a 12. So maybe we will head over towards the non-fiction space. I would like to try to touch all of the rooms, but I'm very interested in reading a non-fiction throughout the month. So let's try that. So we will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we are going to start with a non-fiction as well as our graphic novel. Non-fiction is probably a bit of a hard first prompt to go with because non-fiction books can take a very long time to read. But we'll see how this adventure takes me. And I've decided to roll in a book that I started last year as one of my TBRs, and that is Join the Rich Club by Peter Switzer. So I have started this. I'm not too far into it, but it is written by an Australian and it is about building wealth. which is something I'm interested in. It's something everybody's interested in, really. So I am going to try to finish this one out as part of my wanders throughout the library in TBRathon. And like I said, this was a long video, so hopefully you are still with me. And I'm interested to hear down in the comments what books you're planning to read throughout the month of January, what your thoughts, feelings otherwise are on my new TBR game. If there's anything you would like me to include, anything that is a bit confusing that you need more of an explanation for, let me know down in the comments. But with that, I'm Verity, and this was my January TBR, utilizing my very own game board called Pages Between the Red Dirt and Stardust. And now to the outro.